All right, folks, welcome, welcome. Good to see you on this fabulous Thursday afternoon, depending on where you are, afternoon, morning. As we're waiting for folks to keep joining us from the waiting room, we will invite you, if you would like to say hello in the chat, letting us know your name, pronouns if you feel comfortable, and maybe where you're joining us from. And if you want to share your role or professional affiliation to help us learn more about one another, that would be great as well. And we'll get started in just a minute. All right. Thanks for the folks starting to do those intros in the chat. I will drop one as well. Let's get started. So welcome to our third virtual conversation of the week with LeaderShape. And today you came for the Reverend Dr. Jamie Washington of the Washington Consulting Group to share information about this really important topic that I think builds so beautifully on the previous conversations we've had this week, which is the impact of navigating multiple pandemics on students with marginalized identities. And we'll get to Jamie in just a few minutes, but my name is Juan Mendizabal. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Director of Program Quality and Management here at LeaderShape, and I am excited to kick us off today before we get into our session. So just some thoughts about the logistics of our time together today. We love and encourage folks to use the chat. The chat is where we can do our best communication, affirmation, curiosities with one another. So we encourage you to use that throughout our time together today. And if there's a question that you have particularly for either Jamie or me that you don't want to share publicly, you can message me and let me know, and then we'll find a way to get that answered as well. And then due to our limited time together, we'll very kindly ask folks to not use their microphone and unmute to ask a question, but if you use the chat, that would be great, and we'll make sure that folks get their questions answered. So a moment to pause before we get into the content around land and our LeaderShape land acknowledgement. And if you'd like to follow along with me, LeaderShape would like to begin this presentation by acknowledging that the land each one of us is on today is the original homelands of Indigenous and tribal nations. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from these territories, and we honor and respect the many diverse Indigenous peoples still connected to this land. Please honor and acknowledge the Native American and Indigenous peoples from the land that you are joining us from, and give thought to your ancestry and the generations that came before you. And so maybe we can spend about 10 to 15 seconds or so honoring and acknowledging, whether that's eyes open, eyes closed, whatever that moment looks like for you. So if you are new to LeaderShape and perhaps new to this conversation series, we welcome you, and we would love for you to know a little bit more about who we are. So LeaderShape has a vision. Our vision is a just, caring, and thriving world where all lead with integrity and a healthy disregard for the impossible. And our mission is to transform the world by increasing the number of people who lead with integrity and a healthy disregard for the impossible. And LeaderShape has a definition, which we also can think of as an understanding or an approach to leadership, what grounds our work. And it is this, that leadership involves living in a state of possibility, making a commitment to a vision, developing relationships to move vision into action, and sustaining a high level of integrity. Effective leadership takes place in the context of a community and results in a more equitable society. So the work that we've been doing with our different programs, which we'll learn a little bit more later on our way out today, as well as this conversation series, regardless of the topic, it all comes back to these core values and what we know is at the core of creating this just, caring, thriving world together. So I will stop with that introduction there and am so excited and honored to hand things over to the Reverend Dr. Jamie Washington of the Washington Consulting Group, but also of so many other things that have personally influenced my understanding of leadership, social justice, higher education. And I think the impact is immeasurable on the landscape of all of the work that we do, including our work at LeaderShape. So Jamie, thank you so much for being here and welcome.
Thank you so much, Juan. It is indeed an honor, always, and a pleasure to be in my LeaderShape family space. Jamie Washington, he, him, his pronouns, and it's great that you all decided to sign on. I don't take for granted that when folks take out their break time, intentional time, lunchtime, to kind of to be into this space. And so I have been connected to and a part of LeaderShape for several decades now. And one of the things that the pandemic invited us into was this kind of space. And that's virtual engagement and virtual learning space. And so it's one of the things that many organizations and spaces have realized as that's one of the things we want to keep, right, from the pandemic. And so we're grateful for this series of conversations. And I know that many master's theses and dissertations and campus, senior projects will be based upon the impact of the last 3 years, right? We will, much of that is to come, and we have not yet seen all of what 2020 and through 2022 brought us. But I'm going to enter the conversation this afternoon, and I'm going to share my screen and share a few slides. Got a few comments to make around some things that were highlighted for me in this time and kind of what's going on continually post that, and then just kind of open it up. I really want this to feel like a kind of a lunchtime conversation and not just the, kind of Jamie talking head space. So let me just go ahead and share my screen. And we'll be in that space. Give me 1 second here. Okay, so I'm gonna start, and I join Juan in the land acknowledgement and the recognition that the land that I'm traditionally joining from is the Piscataway Kanoy tribal nations in the Baltimore, Washington area, as well as honoring the labor of folks who helped to create the spaces that we occupy today. And so one of the things that has occurred and that I've seen as an impact of the post-pandemics over the last couple of years is that in addition to a land acknowledgement, many spaces are now also engaging a labor acknowledgement. Most of those labor acknowledgements honor and engage the work of BIPOC folks in helping to build the spaces that we occupy, many of whom didn't have access to the spaces that they were helping to create and to build. And so as Juan has already invited us into the space of honoring the land of Native and Indigenous folks, we've also honored the labor of Black and Brown bodies that, again, have been on the forefront of creating the space that we occupy. I thank you, Juan, for inviting us to just pause and take a deep breath in that way, because one of the other things that have happened as a result of the pandemic is that many of the things that are being done, particularly based upon the pandemic of racial oppression, have become performative. And so we want to ensure that as we're doing land and labor acknowledgements, that we're not only having it be the first slide, but we're also taking the opportunities to continue to deepen our learning, our understanding, and the impact that we've experienced of that past harm. I feel like I'm frozen. Can someone come on and let me know if all is well?
I see that all is well, unless the slide that you're intending is not the land and labor acknowledgement. Everything looks good to me.
Okay, good. So, but I just don't see my head moving. I'm moving around.
I see you moving around.
Oh,
and
you
it's like other folks might be too as well. So, oh no! And the second that I said that, Jamie, you froze. Let's see. Shoot Jamie a message in the chat to let him know that I think he is frozen now.
He looks frozen to me too. I thought I would offer, as he's hopefully rejoining us soon from thawing out, that this labor acknowledgement is new to me. This is really interesting to see that perspective of the acknowledgement of the work as well. So as always, I appreciate the Reverend Doctor for enlightening us in ways in which we're unfamiliar with and that are new to us, and broadening our scope of what we're acknowledging in those spaces. Is that new to anyone else as well? Has anyone else seen a labor acknowledgement? Yeah, I see some nods on there too. So thank you for that, Demetria. I see you nodding along with that. Like, yes, labor acknowledgements. Yes, it's old news.
Yeah, it is. It was new to me to see that as well. And it looks like folks in the chat are thinking that.
Yeah, I really appreciated that.
Yeah.
I think what's important for us to recognize and acknowledge too is that this does not take away from the land acknowledgement at all. This layers it. It allows for us to continue the conversation around labor and land, because I've been on a campus where someone has actually said to me offline, oh, wow, why would you do that? I'm like, oh no, once again, this is white supremacy. It's pitting identity groups against each other. I said, absolutely not. This is a layering of the conversation around our history and our connection. So that's me channeling the Reverend Dr. Jamie Watson, because that's exactly what he would say.
And Demetria, I see your comment there too around land, labor, and water acknowledgement. I really appreciate that too. I think our very own Dr. Tanya Williams does such a wonderful job of that too, of inviting in that it's not just the land that we're thankful for. There was a lot more that's cultivated and given appreciation for in those spaces. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and to talk about marginalized identities, what a perfect time to have this conversation. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Welcome back, Jamie. We were just going deeper into your slides, so thanks for giving us some food for thought.
excellent, excellent. And there we go. I'm going to need permission again, Juan.
Of course. Here you go.
So one of the, how timely that we had that moment where technology just did what technology does, right? So, and you just never know. And so, so that's a dynamic. And then depending upon kind of where you are and what kind of access you have to that is another one of the impacts. And I'll talk a little bit more about that moving forward. But where I was as we were as technology did its own thing was in the space of acknowledging the land and the labor. And I'm glad that you all had an opportunity to kind of be further into that conversation. Because again, as I said, the danger that we are in right now is that so many things have been performative and reactionary. And so I'm always in the space of inviting folks to slow down and really begin to think what these contributions, land and labor mean. And what I think I was hearing as we were coming back on is that as we think about the particularly Native and Indigenous folks, that it's more than the land that needs to be acknowledged and engaged, I think is what I was hearing, and I appreciate that so much. So as I move into kind of my comments today, I want to just kind of name, I appreciate the title of the impact of multiple pandemics. And I want to just give you an opportunity to take a look at some of the highlighted things that have happened over these past couple of years. And some folks who have worked with me before know that I always engage context before content. Sometimes it feels like folks attempt to move into content too fast. But what you'll see here in these images is, and how many of you remember the moment that you knew COVID was a thing, right? And you connect to the time. And, you know, I often talk about, I remembering being in the grocery store, just, you know, picking up a few things and, you know, getting a sense that something's happening, right? Something's about to happen here. And they were closing the Baltimore City schools. And as soon as that was happening, I got on the phone and called my daughters and said, get to the grocery store now, get some things for the kids and all of those things. So it's a very vivid memory for me. And I was, quite frankly, a bit excited because it felt like we was about to have a 2-week snow day, like just some time off, you know, like, because it was only supposed to be 2 weeks, right? So that's how it started. And then again, as we moved into the pandemic, the health part of that, what I share all the time is that I knew at that moment we were going to see how systemic oppression played out. I knew we were going to see and experience the differential impact of this immediate national, at the moment, a crisis on minoritized communities. But I also knew we weren't going to be paying attention to that. And that the noticing of the differential impact was going to come much later, right? And it did. About 6 to 8 weeks later, we began to talk about our underrepresented and our minoritized communities in terms of what that meant. But then the second thing there is the murder of George Floyd. And I have those two things at the top because as we talk today, those are the two pandemics that I'm wanting us to engage. And everything that happened post that happened in the context of those pandemics, right? So the health pandemic and the 1619 pandemic, the systemic racism pandemic, that again was still in effect, was still happening, but then just got heightened on that May 26th day. So as you see these images, you'll see again everything from the uprisings to the killing of No Justice for Breonna, to in the midst of the pandemic, our national leadership at the time signing an executive order that made conversations about systemic racism, framed them as anti-American propaganda, and that they should not be had. The vote of 2020 and all of the dynamics around the pandemics that were a part of that energy, and the results from that being, again, President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, all happened in the context of the pandemic. And that first row of pictures, folks, is just 2020, right? That's the end of 2020. And I remember many of us just wanting 2020 over, cancel 2020 so we can move on. And as we move into 2021, January 6th was the insurrection, right? Again, all in the context of these pandemics, the inauguration, the call for impeachment, and then the vaccinations, right? And all the, who had access, what was it real, and who should take it? And then again, another example of systemic racism and the raising of its ugly hate around Asian hate that happened in the April of that year. And then the results from the Derek Chauvin trial, if you'll remember. Anybody, and I talk about this because it was informing the context of what was happening within campuses and in communities on higher education. And so how did we engage in our workplaces during that time? What was going on for students? How were we responding? That whole weekend, I tell folks, if anyone remembers the tension in the country, it was palpable around what's going to be the decision. And if it goes this way, what might happen? I remember National Guards being poised, right, for uprisings and disruptions in communities. And we move on again into things that summer. We thought we were going to be okay, and then we have the Delta variant, right? And so we're back in spaces. So we get through 21. We have again Ukraine. We have Afghanistan. We have all of these things. Again, all of this is happening. We have the confirmation of our judge. We have again the murders in Buffalo, in Texas. And then as we come to last year, the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And so I just want, and this isn't everything, but I want you to understand that we have been through a collective trauma. And one of the things that's been very important is to begin to think about what happens when communities have navigated this level of harm and trauma, right? So as we talk about the impact, I just wanted to start with some images, right, around a number of the things that we have been through. And so I'll just invite, one or two comments around what's coming up for you as you experience just this slide. Any thoughts, reactions, feelings? Juan, how do we want to do it? Folks just raise their hand. Can we unmute them and let them come in, or is that all right?
Whatever you'd like to do is perfect.
Sure. Yeah, so if anyone just wants to give a word or comment or reaction, generally when I do this live and in person, I invite folks to just kind of say, seeing all of this, I'm left feeling. What am I left feeling or thinking, given where we've been over the last 2.5 years? Anyone want to put their voice in? Just use the hand raise in the reaction area. Yeah, please come on in, Bonnie.
Hi, thank you all for being here and for doing this presentation. I was a student, I just graduated this past May. So I was a college student during all of this while this was kind of happening, and thinking about this, I'm left feeling and like kind of remembering how the attitude was just to kind of push through. I was in a class when we found out about January 6th and the insurrection, and there was no acknowledgement. There was no sort of, hey, let's take the day. We just kept going. And so I think to kind of look at this and to kind of think about that we've just pushed through all of this is crazy realization.
Absolutely. Who relates to what Bonnie is saying, that in many, I remember very clearly, I was actually doing a session with a virtual session on systemic racism and anti-racism when the insurrection was occurring. And because I was focused on the presentation, I couldn't see what was happening in social media world, and literally someone in the session said, Jamie, do you see what's going on in DC? And we had to stop. And it completely shifted the direction of the conversation. Absolutely. Anybody else want to get in and name anything before I move us around just kind of the impact of seeing this? So again, as we talk about the impact of navigating kind of the multiple pandemics, I want us to hold that COVID-19, while certainly there was at the beginning very clear racialized impacts, right? So we know that it impacted differentially BIPOC communities and poor communities, right? LGBT, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But we did not really begin to engage that right at the beginning. So, everybody was really kind of worried about kind of the technology and getting people out and not getting sick, and who's around and who's not around, but weren't necessarily thinking about what that means for different communities. Juan, please come on in.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm seeing there's a lot of powerful response to the slide of the visual of that. And think about what's coming up for me is I don't know that I personally ever was able to find a sense of closure with any one of these individual incidents, because they kept coming and coming and coming to a point that I'm even wondering, like, wait a minute, what even is that? Which is absurd for something that big and that substantial to be faded away. But how could anybody make space for all of this?
Exactly.
So yeah, that's what I'm sitting with as I look at this.
Yes, thanks so much. And Bonnie kind of raised this whole notion that we just kept pushing, just kept moving. And there was really no time and often very little spaces to even process all that was going on and all that was happening for us in that time frame. And so as we think about, again, as I named earlier, these multiple pandemics provided an opportunity for us to see how systemic oppression works. And one of the ways that it works is to just not see it, to just not make a big deal of it, to just keep moving. And that many of our organizations, many of our workplaces were, and I'm not making all of that intentional or intending to be evil or any of that. It's just, it was survival. And we just kept moving, and that both as we think about what was going on, we think about that there was literally traumatic violence that occurred as people navigated some of these things. There was economic impact, there was certainly an institutional power dynamics, all of those things began to show up. And so I just want to highlight just a few things as I navigated and as I continue to navigate post-pandemic, some of the things that were clear. So right, again, at the beginning there, particularly in the context of higher education, there was almost like literally a turn on the dime. Campuses just began to close. People just began to have to go home to work remotely, right? And so again, the whole notion of understanding the differential impact on communities, whether they had access to, kind of the high speed internet. Remember when we didn't know what a reaction button was, right? Or a Zoom room or a breakout room. Again, folks, 2 years ago, this was all new information to us, and some of us were using some of this technology maybe for a meeting here and there or a webinar here and there, but the ways in which we had to learn to operate, and what that meant has been a real impact. It also, in terms of so again, not only in terms of accessing to function remotely and to virtually, but families, communities at home, with one computer, without high-speed internet, having conversations in classes that are not okay to have with your family at home, talking about things in meetings. So all of those things were differentially impacting communities. And there was not a whole lot of talk about what was the impact going to be. Much of it was just about, we've got to keep things going and moving. I talk about the differential impact on particularly LGBTQAI plus folks, not only, but particularly our students, right? So many of our students find their way and begin to find their voices, navigating in the campus community, particularly for residential campus spaces, find safety in being who they are or beginning to explore that space, and then to be forced, if you will, to go back into communities where they haven't felt safe yet to be themselves, was an impact that I would often only hear in spaces where the people were charged to support LGBTQIA plus, right? So it wasn't, kind of a universal understanding and campus-wide leadership understanding about how that might look differently. Likewise, again, how that might look differently for BIPOC students, and for many BIPOC students living on campus might be, or low-income students in poor communities might be the space where they first had their own room, and could be able to work in ways that would have them focus academically. And so not giving attention and understanding that require the teachers and folks who were working with populations such as these manage their expectations. Got to manage your expectations around what it means to show up, and what it means to have your camera on, and what it means to engage, and all of those kinds of things. And if there's not a lens for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, then there's an expectation that everybody can do something, right? Everybody should just be behaving in a certain way. I spoke to this next one. This next one popped for me, particularly the small businesses that never recovered, that many of our communities, particularly again, BIPOC and low income communities, never recovered. Families were deeply impacted that ran businesses that could not operate in the space of COVID and the racialized pandemics. And so while we have many spaces feel like they have moved on and we're in the next round, there's some spaces that just never came back. And those spaces are connected to people, right? And families and livelihoods and incomes and so on and so forth. So that's another thing. One of the things that happened, particularly post the murder of George Floyd. And so I ask if you all think about what happened in terms of campus and community uprisings and the resurgence of Black Lives Matter movement in many ways, that happening, and I've said this several times, I believe, again, the George Floyd murder is iconic, but it is not the first murder or it's the first tragedy that has also been recorded. There's information, there's evidence about other harm that has been done. I believe because we were in the COVID pandemic, it got the attention that it did. And I believe that because we were all slowed down, right? This happened over Memorial Day weekend. Had we not been in COVID, similarly to what Bonnie is naming, it would have been another awful thing, but I was on vacation or at a barbecue, right? My family was doing this, we were leaving the country, we were all of the other things, all of the multiple ways that folks spend their time and their lives in that way would not have had them so attached to the fact of this video happening in that way. So I named that because what happened post that was many of the folks who were slowed down, particularly in the Black community, also were not able to access in the physical way their spaces of support. One of the asks that came to me quite frequently after the murder of George Floyd was not just to do workshops on racism and anti-racism, but it was also to create spaces for minoritized folks, particularly Black healing spaces. And one of the things that got named in one of the spaces that was created was, when stuff like this happens, I'm usually able to go to my church community, to my faith community. And this all occurred when churches weren't coming together. And so the loss of community space also was a big impact that happened for minoritized communities. And so it was not only for faith communities, but some folks, after something like Circle Q, or like, you know, kind of what happened in Orlando, the shootings in Orlando, could go to the club or the bar or the space where I could meet the people and we could commiserate together and we could give each other support. And so the impact of the pandemics and the things that would happen during the pandemics was there was loss of space. And for many folks, the virtual space was a poor second substitute, right? Because what I need is a hug. What I need is to feel the physical energy and stuff of people. So loss of community space to help work through the trauma. I've been working with organizations who've been navigating the impact on essential workers and who those folks were. And in families who were often minoritized, those were the folks who were going out, putting themselves in many ways at risk and their families at risk every day. And so navigating that loss of family members during that time. And then finally, I'll name the need for trauma-informed leadership, supervision, teaching, and practice, right? Which in my mind, and as I continue to do my work, is a people before product practice, right? A people before product practice. And in the spirit of what Bonnie named, well, we just got to keep going. We just got to keep producing. We just got to keep doing this stuff, does not acknowledge the context that we've come out of and the need for spaces to just breathe. So I started back on the road actively in August of 2022. And about half of the ask were around, come and give us space to breathe. Help us find space just to breathe from all that has occurred as we reset. So there's all of these kinds of things where folks were talking about, we appreciate you all never stopping, but keep going, right? And the importance of not only the appreciation and recognition of the impact of never stopping, but also saying, let's do it differently. Let's simply slow down and focus on the healing for the people, not just the product we're trying to produce. And so I know I've shared a bit there and I'll pause, but really I'm open to any questions or impact statements, anything that feels like it's missing as you all think about what's going on in the spaces that you're in now as a result of all of this. How is this stuff manifesting? And again, I think that Juan was naming that for some folks talking about, so what's been the leadership impact? When I talked with students and staff this past fall, I was reminding institutional leaders that you've literally got 3 years of first-year students, right? Because the last couple of years, it's been hybrid, kind of. Maybe folks have been involved, but they've not been on campus. So I don't know where that building is. I know I'm a junior, but I have never been actually to that building. I've only signed on to that class in Zoom, right? And we're coming from places where students have not had the opportunity to develop the skills that get developed in junior and senior year for engaging. So they're showing up not having had the practice that those last 2 years of high school give them, right? Which also impacts people then showing up on campus with the capacity to engage in these very real and oftentimes emotionally charged conversations. So I'll stop. Y'all know I can get fired up, obviously, with all of this stuff, but open to questions, comments, and any ads that folks might want to put in the room.
Jamie, thank you for this. I know that chat feature is just, I mean, it's a novel of the responses to things that you're saying, and I'm taking it in too. And I'm thinking so much about when you talk about leadership, but I think the student experience as well, and not just in higher ed, but in every industry, is that we got so like heightened in how we respond to things and how quickly to respond to things and anticipating the next thing happening, because is that one of those first slides you showed, like so much happened in such a short period of time and we were just all waiting for the next thing to happen. It was so exhausting. And I think the ways in which we've tried to relearn maybe how to kind of like dial some of that back a little bit and thinking about like not to be so on edge or so tense and waiting for the next thing, but like, can we start to dial this back a little bit? Like as we come out of pandemic, can we come out of that tense and high alert response to things as well?
Yeah.
It's hard. It's very hard to do.
Yeah. And I think it's a leadership responsibility.
Yeah.
So there's a requirement that leadership recognizes that pattern, that one is not sustainable, that two has contributed to the great resignations and the great reimaginations, right? That folks are like, oh no, I can't do this. I need to reconsider if this is the context and the space that I want to do the work. All of those things are impacting that. And if leaders aren't conscious and clear that this is some of the stuff that's contributing to that, this product over people, right? Then we'll continue to see what we're seeing in this space. Absolutely. Yes, please come on in, Demetra.
Hi, friends. I will just share. I think I sit in an interesting space where in 2020, I had a daughter who was a graduating high school senior. So working at that time as a campus-based professional, watching just how the campus she was entering was navigating all things related to COVID versus how the campus that I was at was navigating all things COVID. And even now, just this past Christmas break, talking with her and still realizing there is a lot that she missed. And I'm tearing up thinking about it, but there's a lot of those traditions that she will never experience. Oh my gosh, and how that is still impacting her today, even though she's a junior, right, in college. She's continued on being a very involved and engaged student on her campus, but just the grief and the loss that she continues to carry with herself. And I can only imagine for other students who are members of that class coming out of high school, you know, those sacred moments, they won't really ever get to experience those. And what does that mean? What does that look like for them coming into and exiting their undergraduate experience? Yes. And then also thinking about those college students who are student leaders. So one of the things that I often think about, or my colleagues, is, as you mentioned, Reverend Dr. Washington, a lot of these folks are still very much in that first year phase because they don't know what they don't know. and the experiences and the organic nature of some of those transitions,
Right.
they didn't get that. And as campus-based professionals or administrative staff and leadership, folks have to be aware of it can't be business as usual because they don't know what the usual looks like if folks follow.
Absolutely, right? And what I appreciate that you brought into the room is grieving, right? So not just slowing down, right, and continuing, but space to grieve the loss, and so that we can then think about what that means for us moving forward, imagining a new normal. What does it mean to not have had your first year orientation experience and your welcome weeks and all of those kinds of things that happen in the new? What does it mean not to have had your high school graduation, or in the way that or your prom, or your senior class trip, or kind of all of those kinds of things? And that's why I said dissertations, master's thesis, senior projects, this whole area of the impact of COVID. There have been COVID hires, COVID presidents, COVID, leadership change, all of that. What does it mean to, I'm meeting with folks today who got hired in March of 2020, or that ain't never seen nobody in person that they've worked with, and it's the first time that they're seeing them was last fall. Right, so they've maybe have seen them in a virtual space, but never has physically been in the energy of folks. And so the kind of the grieving, the reimagining. What are there ways that we recapture some of those things to attempt to again help in the kind of the healing process around some of those? Yeah. One of the ways that I've been working with senior leadership in this past year, as we talk about the need for trauma-informed leadership, is I've invited folks into, as again, this is a space that none of us have been in before. So every time over the past 2 years I work folks, I was like, y'all know this is our first one, right? So give yourself a break, slow it down. We're doing the best we can. We're trying to figure it out. We're using our best thinking. But I invite people into this space that I referred to as kind of the 4 Ps, which is purpose. Why is it that we're doing what we're doing? How does it matter, and how is it in alignment with the mission and vision of our institution? The second P is people. Who am I doing it for, and who am I doing it with, right? So who are we trying to serve, so that we're clear about that, and who has to do the serving, so that the focus is on the people. So we're clear about purpose and the people. And the next thing then is how, the process. How will we deliver? How will we engage? What are the new ways we have to figure out to do this, given all of the things that have happened? And then what is it that we're trying to deliver? The product, right? My experience is that most folks might do some work around purpose, but are focused on product, right? We got to deliver this, we got to deliver that, we got to deliver. And that when we're doing that, we are continuing to traumatize, because we're not paying attention to the experience of the people who have to deliver, or the people that we're serving. And so I'm inviting folks into a people first practice, right? Get clear about your purpose, and then focus on the people. If you focus well on the people, then the product will come, it will flow. And so at LeaderShape, again, as we talk about creating a just, caring, and thriving world where people lead with integrity, I like to ground us in, we're talking about people. And then when we're doing people, we're recognizing that what's got to be considered in that is the diversity of our communities, and how differentially we want to pay attention to this for this population than this population, that we want to pay attention to equitable treatment and not equal treatment. all of that is where we have people first. So if you're doing people first, DEIB is absolutely in the mix, right? And then we can have the impact of our good efforts be in alignment with our intentions. Thank you all so much for joining today. I hope some of this was helpful. Thanks for hanging out with me during that lunchtime. And I'm going to hand back to Juan and look forward to seeing you and connecting with you all in upcoming experiences and spaces. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for all of that richness. I think as I'm looking at the chat and doing my own reflections, the people first practice is going to stay with me as something that is a great true north. And I'd love to see higher ed folks actually figure out what that means for them, right? And how does that tension make it so tempting to not actually consider such a humanized process that, from what I'm hearing, from what you've shared, is our way through, that it has to be. So thank you so much for that.
Just a quick thing. So coming off of the ASH conference, the Association for the Study of Higher Education, that was in fact President, the past president of ASH, that was the theme, humanizing higher education, and inviting us into a people first practice. And I think that that is, part of our grounding and our value at LeaderShape. And, I think that we do get to lead in that way and help to shift our culture. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jamie. So as we have been talking about the work that LeaderShape does more broadly, would want to at least mention our programs that campuses and other organizations are welcome and encouraged to engage in, from one-day programs to a few hours to 4 days. We have got it all. And if you have any questions about what these entail, our website is linked here. You can shoot a message to the LeaderShape staff on this call, and we would love to work with you to bring these same principles, so much of which were embedded in this virtual conversation, into the work that LeaderShape does every single day. And should you be so inclined to contribute to the sustainability of LeaderShape, we also have a donation link here, so we can continue doing virtual conversations, continue doing our programs, and being a presence that we believe is really important and really matters to the landscape of leadership and social justice. So the final announcement that I'll give, and I promise I'm doing this only as the moderator for today and not as the presenter for tomorrow, but I am the presenter for tomorrow's virtual leadership conversation. And it is actually very appropriately, and JB, you couldn't have set me up with that transition any better, that tomorrow's virtual conversation is about healing grief and trauma and how we do that work with our students. So a perfect bridge to what the messiness and importance of that work looks like. And if you're interested in that, it'll be same place, same time, and we would love to see you. Otherwise, thank you all again so much for taking the time to spend some time with LeaderShape and learn from Jamie and get some new tools and ideas and thoughts to propel your work forward. So thank you so much, and hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you.